apologies to everybody who's been waiting. We're going to call the meeting to order, and Hunter's going to explain what's going on.
Okay. And this is really for our public folks out there that are not here, but we do not have a quorum this evening. We cannot take action. The Planning Commission cannot take action on any case. So we are going to have a work session and discuss some of the items that are on the agenda. But we do plan on reconvening for a special called meeting, hopefully next week sometime. We're targeting Tuesday. Cannot confirm that date, but we will post that at City Hall, Public Works Building, the library. We will also post that date on the website so that everyone can see and send that out on our notification, just so everyone is aware what time and date we will meet back at this location at the Civic Center at Council Chambers. So with that said, I think we can kind of move into the discussion, and I'll turn this back over to our chairperson, Ms. Rebecca Bryant.
Sure. So just to be clear, we can't approve the meeting minutes or do old new business. We're just going to. Okay. So we're just going to jump ahead in our work session to a discussion of the agenda items, starting with UR 2308. And just to be clear, if anyone was here for an item that we can no longer vote on, you know, don't feel compelled to stay if you don't want to sit through the rest of it.
And I will mention old new business. We do have an extension just to keep everyone involved on that one. That is the Aldi store, as everyone knows. That's open, but they did have an MOP. There were a few items left, and one of them has to do with striping. They didn't have the permanent striping as required by ALDOT. I think our gas department has been in installing a new gas line. Once that's done, those finishing items will get complete. So, but we're running up by next meeting, it would have expired. So that was why that's on the agenda. It's 99% done and was when Erica gave it does have a temporary CO so they could open. They do not have their final CO until they get this MOP approved. Okay. So we will recommend that extension next time we meet, and we'll make sure it doesn't expire before then. So, Mike did confirm that date.
September 9th.
Okay. So great. So that was that agenda item. And just so you see, there was the site. It obviously does not look like this any longer, but the northern half of the site is stabilized but has not been developed. The approvals did show future development on that northern site that is part of this MOP. It is in the county, but this was a project that was approved before the jurisdictional changes were implemented, so we will kind of see this to fruition as part of the MOP process.
Okay.
Okay.
So then, agenda item 2308, the request for utility review by Mediacom for the coax cable in the Tracery subdivision.
Yes. And we do have someone with Mediacom with us tonight. And there's 3 on the agenda tonight. They're different locations. I think we had 2 last month, so we've added 1 area. We did approve one with Mediacom last month, but have also added 1. At the root of it is...
I thought we held these over last month.
We approved 1.
Okay.
It wasn't going into every house. They were installing fiber to connect to another neighborhood. So we did approve that one last month, but an additional has been added to your agenda. It was the one in Trentino. So really probably Trentino is probably one of the more challenging subdivisions in the city to put utilities in. It was a very unique design strip. Buildings are really close to the front property line. So, you know, we did discuss last month the physical appearance of these, and that's really the only thing we have on this 115211 review that staff is concerned about. It is coax, and you know, we're helping facilitate a conversation as we review these. For 115211 reviews, we're concerned with what our city streets look like, and that's not bound by the permitting process that is only for right-of-ways. That 115211 can branch out to anything that kind of affects the appearance. And we don't have specifics in our subdivision regulations of these. So that's why we're here presenting this to you. We did have some concern, but I will let MediaCom, representative kind of speak to this and see if there's any alternatives. And we cannot, make a decision right now, but certainly I think if there's any advice you can give, I think they would be happy to receive that. And maybe by the next meeting, if there is any advice or alternatives that can be presented,
Sure.
that will be ready.
Well,
We
and-
do not have any alternatives to present to you tonight from the last meeting, so.
And at the last meeting, what the commissioners expressed was concern at pedestals being visible every 2 lots in a subdivision, and we wanted to see alternatives to that.
Yeah, so Lee, I'll let Lee introduce himself, and, if we can help facilitate the conversation, we certainly will.
My name's Lee Beck. I'm the area director for Alabama, Mississippi with MediaCom, and Jimmy Coker, he's our coastal director of engineer, which construction falls under as well. So, yeah, right now at this time, we don't have any other alternatives to the PEDs to present. I know that we've talked to John Thomas a lot, I think before he took his role, about the concern of wanting vaults and stuff. We know that vaults is still a kind of especially, and just a quick explanation, the closer to the home you get, the more susceptible your equipment is. While this equipment is waterproof, it's not water resistant. And so we do have some stuff that sits in vaults, but it's like our brains, I guess, for lack of words. It's nodes that are cranked down. I mean, they've got bolts all the way around the crank down. We're watching industry. We know that some of the companies that are doing fiber are putting vaults in. We right now are hesitant to go there just yet for the PEDs, vaults that's servicing the home, because that equipment is a little more, is less fail-proof, because those vaults do hold water. And here 5 years from now, I mean, before C-Spire, AT&T came, nobody used vaults for that type stuff. And so what's to say in 5 years they're not coming back from that stuff sitting underwater for so long, because, and they're having to change and go to like a PED type structure like we have. I understand, I guess basically here would be, that's really what I've got, unless you've got any questions or anything and where we are. We're always looking at industry and seeing what they do, and we have looked at that, but it's just not somewhere we're ready to go just yet. So.
I'd be curious if there are places that don't allow you to put pedestals above ground every other lot. I would assume there are.
All the areas
I mean,
in
there's
Alabama and Mississippi, there are right now no restraints to putting the PEDs in the neighborhoods.
What about the other states you're in?
I'm not over that. Jimmy does Florida and Georgia.
We do it the same way in
Delaware
Carolina,
and-
Delaware, Georgia, Florida. So.
And what drives the spacing, the frequency, like every other lot?
You got to get drop work to the house, whether it's fiber or coax. And so if you're, you don't want to go boring underneath driveways or sidewalks. So we obviously follow electrical. If there's electrical PED there, we go there as well. But then if there's not, 2 houses down. Wish I had something I could draw on, but it's really determined on where the driveways are located in the subdivision. Whether, but usually, it's every 2 houses. There's going to be some type of.
Right?
Sir?
Each post
Yes,
serves 2
yeah,
homes.
yeah.
So we put them between them, so
Because
can
you also,
skip a
you
lot.
can't run across somebody else's property to get somebody else's house. I mean, that's would assume that's a law that, you can't.
Actually, that's what the easement's for.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
typically,
yeah.
I don't know what Trentino has, but typically there's a utility easement from the back of the sidewalk, which is the property line, into the private property, and that's actually where a lot of our communications folks are going, because they're getting out of that right-of-way, because the right-of-ways are getting so cramped with all the utilities. So they're typically using that easement. I think we've got a bunch of subdivisions where the PEDs are actually up in the yards.
And that's
the
where
big
they were
phone calls
proposing.
about that.
The big thing for that is we try to stay within 400 feet of the PED to the house. That's the other piece to it. At the bonding location at the power meter on the side of the house. So.
Well, so you're saying the distance from the ped at the right of way, you want to be within 400 feet?
Yes, sir.
It shouldn't be a problem.
Those lots aren't even, those lots are.
And I think I
well
see where you're,
under-
and
Yeah.
we could, I see where you're going. You could do less PEDs by following, like if the drop work to hook up the house,
You
you
could
could follow
daisy chain.
down the easement. But then, and we, as it runs this, while it's an easement, that person still thinks it's their property and they have a right to do with it, because we would be going through their yard as well to get to, like, say, a neighbor's house.
Well,
But-
just so you know, I mean, when they did Rock Creek, I think they did it all in the easements up there, and we took dozens and dozens of phone calls, and we explained to them.
Right,
that-
yeah.
So.
Well, we thank
we're
you
the
for
ones
that.
who'll
We-
end up dealing with the owner.
Yeah.
Well, and that is part of the whole reviews. I mean, that's from the onset when we started getting a lot of these, to have someone that can explain the project. I will kind of tell you a little bit of where this came from us. We did approve through this commission installation similar to this in Stone Creek. And whether it was that neighborhood or not, it was hard to fit the pedestals where the existing kind of utilities are clumped in some areas, and that neighborhood kind of, what would you say, they did not appreciate it, and it did not. I think you did not install anything in Stone Creek ultimately.
We started, but we pulled out, yeah.
Okay. So that's kind of what we're trying to avoid here. In other subdivisions, it's kind of the same situation. And there is a good point made, and I don't know how to resolve this. When we see a subdivision, due to 911 being a critical infrastructure, you see a telecommunication company on plats. It is critical, and historically that was AT&T, Bell companies and all of those. And that seems to be what everybody uses. That's the developer choosing it. There's so much more happening across copper or coax, whether that's coax or standard copper, fiber, small cells. Now we're getting inside satellite technology, upcoming. You got cable and internet and everything else happening. This is after the fact, coming into those same easements that AT&T's on the plat. So it is a struggle for some of the other companies, which it hasn't been as much for C-Spire and some of the others that are putting things underground, the boxes, for the most part. Every company has above ground equipment. It's just, as we've seen, there might be one piece of equipment at the end of the block. But with fiber, they are running. Whether that causes future problems is yet to be seen.
Well, I still,
And we did what was the meeting call that we were here?
DRC.
We did make some contacts, I think this gentleman here, with some local civil survey engineering firms that are now sending us stuff, so, because that came up in that meeting about, if we could get this stuff in the front end. We don't want to be building this stuff when homes are already built, believe me. We want to be in there, we want to, and we've gotten better in some areas. We want to be in there right after electrical. Usually, we got to wait on electrical to go in there usually to see where they place their stuff, because our infrastructure, anybody's, has to tie into electrical at some point. But yeah, we don't like going in when there's homes already built, so.
And there are a lot of people kind of struggling with these situations. I think the county now is requiring during subdivisions, because even AT&T, if they're on the plat, they're not going and installing that before we see final plat. All the other utilities are, but they're waiting until people start moving in, because it's an investment before you're getting a return. The county is requiring, I believe, 3. Mike, is it 3? Okay, 2 2-inch conduits for future companies to come in and utilize those, and have very specifically, this is where the equipment goes. And I think that's probably the key to that's hard for our guys in the field. If there's room to go by existing equipment, whether that's a transformer. Electric transformer is about the same. Usually it's 1 per every 2 houses. Very similar. If it can go in that same area, then that works. But when you've got people's landscape and other things in the way, and now you're sticking in the middle of the yard, that becomes the problem. So, maybe it's something we look at that can work better when there's 2 or 3 or 4 companies in there on new subdivisions, but I don't know what to do on some of these old ones.
I just want to add that I believe that, Trentino especially is going on, getting close to 20 years old. And one of the biggest complaints that I get as a council member is lack of, good internet service. A lot of people work at home. It's mostly related to internet, broadband. But it's difficult to have companies come in after the fact and retrofit a neighborhood. So I don't want to be a barrier to companies that are willing to come in and give people a choice, because I think competition is good for the consumer, and I would like to see these people be given a chance. It is what it is. They didn't have it, and if they're willing to come in and give people a choice on who to, they're going to get a better price and get better services. And that's a big complaint that I personally get.
Sure.
And I don't, and I would, I wouldn't, without being forceful, Eric brought up a good point about the right of way, and it'd be more expense maybe, but I don't know, you wouldn't have to put as many posts, but if you could just run it 3 foot underground, trench it, lay in some conduit, and then branch off to each thing. I don't know if that's feasible there, but just, maybe you could work with the city and try to, work on the aesthetics, but if the people in the neighborhood aren't complaining about it, then
No.
I don't know why we're so worried about it.
And
I
that's
think
where,
the
that's
fact
the
that
ones
getting
that
service
are,
is more important.
that is the one that are complaining.
Yeah,
Like Stone Creek was,
They were-
we had a lot of time and effort.
Well, then they
Yeah.
just won't have another service. They won't
Well, I
have
think the
competition.
reason it came up is that they were complaining, and then that's our job, is to look at the aesthetics of it. And I just want, I hear you about the service and everything, but we did ask to see alternatives, so I sort of hate to see it again without alternatives if they're out there and other people are doing below ground.
I mean, we can, I guess, I can take the blame for that, but like, we can see what you're going, I'm envisioning something where you're saying about going ahead and putting the duct work in maybe, and skip the PEDs and do every 4 houses, but put in duct work. But I guess we assume, or I assumed that it was the PEDs or the vaults, it was that cut and dry and that's a no-go right now for us. But reducing number of PEDs, I think that's something that we can go back and kind of what you were talking about.
You just trench, you guys just lay your
Yeah, I mean,
coax
they're
in the
already
ground, right?
they're already doing their trenching anyway, so it's putting in an extra conduit for the drop work system that would go to the house. I don't know,
Yeah, I
that
mean,
may
it's-
not work, you're the engineer
We
guy.
can review it. I mean, there is some instances where we possibly could put a PED that would feed 4 houses and do a sod box somewhere else where it's just drop network, so we can review that and come back with it.
You're not hooking it back up to anything, there's a vault to take a loop to go up to the house. It's
Yeah.
still a continuous wire to the PED that it's being fed from, so.
We'd really appreciate you all
And I
taking a
think
look at
that would be, and just,
I didn't mean to.
I'm gonna save them some effort in the future, because this comes in as a right-of-way permit typically, because there are lines crossing right-of-way. A lot of these are in the easement, so they don't have the permit fees or anything like that when you're working with it in easement. But we don't need the engineering necessarily. You're gonna have to do that too. But what this committee is looking for is really the physical location of frankly anything above ground. And then, as you know, our right-of-way team is looking at the engineering when it gets to permitting. So I think there's some preliminary engineering that can say, here's where the physical, posts or cabinets will be. And that's really what we need at this level. And work through that before you get to the level 2 engineering, I think. So,
Yeah, the biggest thing is you're going to have, if you try to do every other house, it's all dictated by how the houses are built, because you're going to want to run up the middle, but you don't know if that connection's on the far side of the other house. So then you get into a position where you start having PEDs oddly spaced. You may have 3 in a row and then not at all. So with the 4, if you can trench and run from one location and catch them, I think that would be a whole lot more tenable.
And I think that would be, actually looking at the neighborhoods and where things go. And sometimes it's easy to put things kind of in a CAD program or something similar to space them out based on rules. But actually looking at the neighborhood and kind of
Yeah.
figuring out, do we actually have room to put this here and it not be a problem in the field, because that's where we're going to have that, but at least a little bit on the forefront.
Yeah, especially
Would help.
Trentino, it's really advisable to go out and drive that, because The other subdivisions are very symmetrical. The lots are, Trentino is a completely different thing. Those lots are very oddly shaped. They're narrow, and those houses are in, so you'll be able to get an idea. I have to have a pet here to feed these houses. So a good site visit out there especially
Yeah, that'll work.
would be a really good thing.
And some of those are, actually, some of those houses are rear loaded.
Yeah.
I don't know if the.
There's
utility
an
even
alley
falls on the-
that runs
yeah, there's
around
an
the back
alley
of
on
some
two
of them.
sections of that. That would be much easier to install, but I don't know if there's an easement.
That's
sitting-
actually, could they use the
That's-
alley?
That's what I don't know if that easement follows the alley.
I don't either.
But
Yeah,
we
that
can
would be
certainly help
great.
figure that
Yeah,
out.
It's
because that'll get
rear
it in the
load.
back, and that's
They can
actually where
buy
your
there.
boxes are gonna be, the
That's
closest
the-
run.
What's the one, because there's a weird alley there, 50% of it is Trentino's, 50% of it is Niemeyer's.
It's the one on the east side.
And it's a private
Yeah.
road, but I don't know if there's utilities.
Yeah, I don't-
We can certainly figure that one out.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any more commissioner questions or? So otherwise, I mean, since.
Can't really make a decision. but
Yeah,
I
so,
think-
and we kind of covered all three. I mean, can this do,
Yeah, just to show you, we
kind
will
of
flip through and
fumbling
show
our
you
way
the
through our
geography.
non-traditional meeting?
Yeah. We did look at this last month, but I'll flip through just to show you this is just the geography of where we're looking at. So this is River.
That's Tracery.
Tracery. River Horse off Blueberry Lane. And it is the project to the property to the north. North Station is on the south, so I'm assuming you're already in North Station, about halfway through. So you're picking up these customers as well in North Station?
Correct.
Okay.
Is that Tracery?
This is River Horse. Yep. So a portion of the customers. Now, I do want to mention this while we're in here. If y'all haven't looked here, that is a green space right there that does not have an easement through it. The electric folks hit that with the extension, so it's a very tight right of way. And don't we
Yeah.
have some?
We have
deep
wetlands.
Structures in that road. There's wetlands.
There's wetlands in the
There's
low,
basically
yeah.
almost a bridge, but there are some concerns here. I'm sure you've done the math, but Blueberry's wide open if that was an option. But definitely check with us on this one because there's a perceived easement there, but there's not an easement on either side of the road. You got choke point. And then the new one that we didn't see last month, this is Trentino. That's Pearly Gaskin was the road that is private. That is a lot of the houses are rear loaded, so you enter into the garage on.
So where is this rear, so it follows the?
This
On the
one
right.
for sure is, you can see all the homes here.
Yeah, I thought
Or
it looked-
that's back, there's a common area here. There is another small section in there, I believe, that has some, but it's a, there are some unique challenges, I think, in that one. If you've been there physically, if you haven't, I think it would be worth the trip. Because, like I said, I think there's a lot of pavers in that area. House is really close and on topography at times. I mean, you might be boring under somebody's steps. It's that close.
Oh, gee.
So I think, that's certainly someone to kind of check out and see. You've got some roundabouts in there. It's not your typical lot and block
Okay.
subdivision.
Are we only looking at the 9/11 pedestal, CPH 9/11? Or are you looking at the bigger ones too?
That's the only ones we have currently, except for at our AMP locations, which it doesn't seem like y'all have the drawings
I
on
just-
that. We've got some that are similar, that are stand-up heads, just a tad bit bigger for those line extenders to sit into.
Okay, on the, just, the corrugated part of the pedestal, is that underground?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we're only looking at 1.5 feet above ground.
That makes a
Yes, sir.
difference.
Well,
And I think that's key, like anything that we see above ground for this meeting, and then sometimes it gets a little bit, what are you submitting for? For permitting, you're gonna have to have a lot more information, but for us, really whatever's above ground, if it's on the map and they have an example of what it looks like, that would help tremendously. But that's the three locations.
Okay.
and everything else was kind of our standard comments.
And I apologize, I know I can't be here next week, but maybe I can
I'll
talk
show
to
up
this
next
guy
week,
into
it's fine.
coming here
It's
next
fine.
week.
Well, and there's no.
We apologize for the
I
inconvenience.
I don't
do
know
wanna
who may be here
clarify.
different or.
And just to clarify, if it takes you guys a little bit more time to put that together, you're not tied to that. If we
Okay.
meet next week, it's to kind of rectify the meeting we missed, but we're here every month. So I know I would assume you have a sense of urgency that we don't have. So if you need the time, you have it.
Okay.
Can I just say one more thing, Hunter? You know, we talked about small cell ordinance. We encourage vendors to make use of existing poles, so we didn't have to place another pole every 400 foot in the city.
Right.
Is there any structure that might exist? I mean, I'm not saying the subdivision would even allow it, but a lamp post, for instance, could you put a box on the back of one of those? Or I mean, is there a way to just kind of disguise your junction boxes?
And that, I mean,
You don't
that.
even necessarily have to answer that, just maybe give it some thought, but.
That really speaks to the goal, is that in the worst case scenario, all of a sudden we've got 6 or 7 little plastic bumps in everybody's front yard, and we're just trying to avoid that and get more coordinated. I think that's
I
a
think-
great idea. I don't know how it works, but.
Some of the landowners will probably do that with shrubs and then get really upset when you come to pull them up so you can get inside the box.
Yeah.
I know we don't have any kind of street lighting in Tracery or River Horse. I don't know about Trentino. Been a little while since I've been in there.
Trentino's got,
They
they
got some
all should have
lamps.
street
I mean,
lighting.
Are there lamps there?
Yeah, every one of them should have street lighting, they're required to. They're usually not installed by the time we have final plat,
Okay,
but we have the invoice at Riviera.
gotcha.
They don't, Riviera, in their areas, they don't install until after final plat.
I mean, I think the only problem you would have is that, you know, it's kind of sounds like what the county's doing. The city may say, hey, we're gonna start buying these, somebody develops this street lamp that has these, you know, cable internet connections at the bottom of it. Who, would you be able to cut off different access to different you know, if you
Yeah.
open up one thing, is someone gonna have access to our stuff, C-Spire, AT&T, or whatever?
Every situation would be unique, and I don't think that we would ever come up with, one street lamp design for everybody to use. I don't think we want to do that. But it was just a thought, and then just to try to mask the additional structures as much as possible.
But it does
Because
bring
that's
us
what
a
we're
good
talking
point.
about here.
In this pedestal, what kind of equipment's in there? I mean, we're talking 4 wires and a
Yeah,
box.
just a little tap with 4
So
wires. that go to it.
Theoretically, all 4 of your companies, if you were using the equipment, could fit in one box. I know you don't like your access to,
Yeah.
but theoretically, it's not large equipment
It'd get
for the
tight.
last mile.
Yeah, it'd be tight because, you know, some of AT&T's taps could be pretty large or they could be small, just depending on what they use.
And they can disconnect everybody else's while you're out there.
Yeah, right.
But
Okay.
a lot of times when we see these pedestals, the top's off with minimum. Are there?
If you put a jumper between the two, would you get both services?
All right.
Okay, well, thank y'all.
Thank you.
We
Thank you
appreciate it.
for
We'll
your time.
see you back.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the next item, we can't vote on it, so I'm just gonna turn over the co-chair to John Worsham.
I know you presenting this?
Mike Jeffries will.
Okay.
Good evening. Mike Jeffries with the City of Fairhope. So this is, we've seen this case before. We heard this in March. We went over it. There have been some minor changes to this, and we'll go over that in this presentation. We have the owner, Mr. Ritt, is with us this evening, as well as Chris Lieb with Lieb Engineering, who did some work for the drainage study that you saw in the packet. So it's a 2-lot minor subdivision located at the northeast corner of North Bayview Street and Blakeney Avenue. It's zoned R2 and approximately 0.59 acres. On the screen, the left is the zoning map, and on the right is the aerial, a little out of date. The lot is now currently completely vacant, including an accessory structure that was on the site last time we heard this. There is now no structures above ground on the property. The Picture of the plat is on the screen. A little bit different from last was before there was an accessory structure on the proposed Lot 2 on the far east side, and the property lines kind of jogged around that existing building. The lines have been straightened up. That accessory structure is gone, and you'll notice on here there are in green a 5-foot drainage and utility easement, and those are for some modified drainage and utility easements that are being requested with this application. In general, all the lots front on a publicly maintained road meet the lot size requirements. So the property is vacant. None of the flow patterns are being changed currently, but the applicant has provided an engineered drainage plan by Lieb Engineering to support the altered drainage easements. That has been looked at by staff. Our Public Works Director, Richard Johnson, our building official, Eric Cortinas, has seen these. Utility comments, its electric, water, sewer, and gas are provided by the city of Fairhope, telephoned by AT&T. Based off the flow model, the applicant's engineer has stated that installing an automatic sprinkler system meets current ISO fire suppression ratings. The city does require fire flow to meet the International Fire Code, and this does not. Current state law prohibits our building department from requiring a sprinkler system in 1 or 2 family dwellings. Back to those easements I was referencing, the drainage and utility easements, asking from a waiver to provide modified easements along the property lines. The drainage report provided by Lieb Engineering, again, was reviewed. Staff does support the waiver request with adding a note to the plat referencing this case number to ensure that that drainage plan can be reviewed and followed upon at the time of building permit. There is adequate right-of-way for the utilities to be located, and the utility department does not object to having these modified utility easements either. Concerning connectivity, sidewalks currently do not exist along either roads adjacent to the property, and the subdivision regulations do allow for the planning commission to allow a 10-foot sidewalk easement in lieu of actually installing the sidewalks when their sidewalks are absent to close proximity of the subdivision. The applicant is requesting from a waiver from installing the sidewalks or providing that easement. The waiver requests were included in your packet, had a little more detail with those. Staff is not in support of the waiver request to not install the sidewalk or to not install a waiver. Staff is, however, in support of installing the easement in place of the sidewalk as permitted by the subdivision regulations. In the waiver request, outlining the sections for them, the 15-foot utility and drainage easement, modifying that to a 5-foot utility and drainage easement. The second one is installing the sidewalk or providing an easement. Recommendation, staff, again, as I said, supports the altered drainage and utility easements. Staff does not support the not installing or not providing for an easement. And as you can see, this would be staff's recommendations for the case, is to approve the modified drainage waiver, adding the 10-foot pedestrian access easement. A solution to fire flow is reached between the city and owner, and adding a note to the plat that at time of permitting refer to Planning Commission case SD 23.23 for certain drainage requirements. And I do have attached at the end of this show a few more additional slides prepared by the applicant if the commission wishes for him to come up and speak. If you have any questions for staff, I'd be happy to answer those. And again, the applicant and his engineer, Chris Lieb, is here tonight to answer questions as well.
Can they?
Yeah, so just to clarify, I mean, we do not have a quorum, so any action that occurs will have to be redone.
Right. We
And
won't
so they're
actually be
here, and
voting to
it's, I think
discuss.
it's within your purview if you'd like to hear from them, both the applicant and/or anyone else that's available. But we cannot open a public hearing. You could still let them speak, but it has really no legal effect. And what we would have to do is, for the next meeting, we'd have to do it all over again. Give them the opportunity to speak, open a public hearing before you could take any vote. So just as long as everyone's on the same page that really there's no, there may be some practical benefit of a discussion, which is what we're doing kind of informally, but there's no legal effect, and it will have to be done with a quorum next meeting.
Mr. Ritt, would you like to speak now and do this again later? You need me to put you on. You can get it with the
I can
left
get
hand.
it with my left hand.
Arrows
Arrow there.
forward and back.
Okay, good evening. My name's Bob Ritt. I have traveled from out of town, actually from Pennsylvania, to come in town specifically for this meeting. So I really appreciate everybody's time and effort in this. I would also like to thank the planning department we had some discussion since the March meeting, and I think we've moved in a very positive direction, both for the city of Fairhope and for us as lot owners. So, as Mr. Jeffries just mentioned, since the March meeting, the recommendation from the Planning Commission was to remove the garage structure. We did go ahead and remove the garage structure. Our original intention was to leave it during construction for storage materials and then take it down, but we went ahead and removed it, so that's not an issue. As Mr. Jeffries pointed out, in the far east to the right there where the garage structure is, we straightened out the lot boundary lines as the planning department had suggested. So that's also been accomplished. If you recall, back in March, there's a requirement in the subdivision regulations, which are kind of generic to be applied across all situations. But in the Bluff area, it's kind of a unique situation in that you have right-of-ways along the street. So you have a right-of-way along Blakeney, you have a right-of-way along Bayview, and they're 20 to 25-foot right-of-ways, and that's where all the utilities exist. And all the neighboring lots around here are fully developed, so there's no need to cross the lots in the future for utilities. But part of the requirement was a 15-foot easement, which impinged upon the building setbacks. There's a 10-foot side building setback for the main structure of the house, or a 5-foot setback. So we worked with Chris Lieb in engineering. I'd like to recognize Chris for his work. And we worked with Eric and Hunter and Mike, and we came up with, I think, a good solution, and that is a 5-foot utility drainage easement, as well as some improvements along Blakeney to address the drainage. So I think that's come to a good resolution. The next one are the sidewalks. So, as you may be aware, in the Bluff area, there are no sidewalks currently. The adjoining lots don't have sidewalks. Putting in sidewalks today would not serve its intended purpose. It'd be a sidewalk to nowhere. I'm not opposed against sidewalks, but it would make the neighborhood aesthetically displeasing to go by and say, well, there's a sidewalk there, but there's not sidewalks elsewhere. There is existing right-of-ways along Blakeney and Bayview, as I mentioned. They're 20 to 25 feet. That's between the road and the property line of the lot. So there's plenty of green space in there for sidewalks if they were ever to be added. So sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words. So what the planning department is advocating is a 10-foot right-of-way within the property line. So if you looked here on the drawing, there's the road here, and then there's a 20 to 25-foot right-of-way here, and the same along Blakeney. That's where the sidewalks would normally be located. What they're advocating is taking 10 feet into the property line and putting an easement for a future sidewalk. Well, this causes a number of issues. First of all, as you can see along Blakeney, there are a number of heritage trees along Blakeney. Particularly, there's a 46-inch oak tree out there in the front corner of Blakeney. There's also a couple 26-inch oaks and 16-inch magnolias along that line. So feasibly, it would be impossible to put a sidewalk in that area. The other thing is if you were to ever put sidewalks in that area, it would be aesthetically displeasing because it would look like the sidewalk being 25 to 35 feet away from the road is like in the middle of the yard along Bayview. Along Blakeney, it would be 10 to 15 feet next to the house, but it would be 20 to 25 feet away from the road. So it would look odd to have a sidewalk there. If we were to ever construct the sidewalks in this location, then the sidewalks are actually out of compliant with the standard terms as defined in the building regulations as to where they're to be located in the right-of-way. So in essence, we're almost creating a non-compliance. And lastly, the article that the city the planning department is reflecting, in my opinion, does not relate to the current situation. It relates to roads that are not controlled by the city. They would be county roads or city roads. And it specifically states that in the regulation, this should be applied to roads that are other government entities. So it might be useful to have the city's attorney opine on that. So what would it look like if the sidewalks were ever put in the existing right-of-ways? Well, as I mentioned previously, there's adequate space there. It would preserve the heritage trees because there are no trees in the right-of-way. It would comply with the current subdivision regulations as to where the sidewalks are to be located. And in fact, the regulations, there's a number of pictures and dimensions, and it would fit perfectly within that. The other thing is it would be a consistent approach amongst neighboring lots. So if you go back to the other one, if you put a sidewalk easement on our property 10 feet up, well, the neighboring properties wouldn't have that same easement. So you'd have to jog the sidewalk back down towards the neighboring lots as well. So in closing, all I would ask the planning department or the planning commission to consider is by having the sidewalks up on the property, how does this make it better for the Bluff neighborhood? How does this make it better for the community of Fairhope? And that's all I would ask. Any questions?
Good job. Just based on your drawing here, I'm just going to point this out. On the Blakeney side, if they move the sidewalk into the right-of-way, it looks like you'll be impacting just as many trees as if you have it going through the 10-foot
No, right
easement.
here, this is the view of the sidewalk, this gray view right here. This gray line would be the sidewalk, and the area of the right-of-way is from here to here.
Okay, so in your drawing, you're having the sidewalk right on the street.
Yes, in this drawing, in option 2 drawing, the sidewalk is located in the right-of-way as originally intended.
Well, right on the street, which...
It's not on the street. No. There's 20 to 25 feet.
Oh, I understand, but I'm sorry, it bordering right on the street.
It's like about 10 feet from the street.
No, it's 10 feet from the street. So right here, if you can, I'm sorry for the line right here. This is the edge of the road right here.
Okay.
This is green space, and then that's the edge of the sidewalk.
Where is the drainage?
The weir drain is like right here. It's right there. The existing weir.
And the grading that you're proposing, where is that at? The grading you're proposing?
Oh,
The
it's
grid
back.
design?
It's back here. It's back up in. It's back right up in here.
Okay.
Was that the drainage plan?
I see it. I was looking at your handout instead of up here because it's easier for me to see.
It's about where that sidewalk is on your plan. So, and to clarify, you know, we do not think there's in any short time frame there will be a sidewalk. We've discussed that. Procedurally, we were getting waivers for installation of sidewalks all the time, so we said, well, we don't know what the future is gonna hold. But the future may be 50 years down the road. Trees may be different, we may have different needs of the road, so that's where the waiver was. We didn't require a waiver. If you didn't want to install a sidewalk, and that's, for us, it's a little bit of a challenge because everybody, thank you, just about everybody we see has a reason not to include a easement. If we agree that the sidewalk is not installed, every applicant we see, they're 2 miles from the existing sidewalk. They're on a county, you know, maybe a road that still has a highway construction setback of 200 feet, plenty of room to do. We established this and have made everyone do this. And I'll tell you one place it really benefited in an exact situation that Mr. Ritt shows on the screen of North Hills, down on Section Street. It is a city street. We have the easement. 95% of the sidewalks are in the right of way, but there's a lot of trees. There's very much a ditch like this instead of the traditional culverts and gutters. It's a much more natural appearance if you haven't been down there. And it allows us to kind of weave in and out of the trees with the sidewalk still meet ADA. So it gives us that flexibility. And that's where we're at, you know, as staff, and we've never recommended we don't have at least the easement.
And to emphasize it, to clarify an old colleague, what we do for one, we have to do for all.
That's right.
But I don't think anybody's suggesting that at all, though. I don't think anybody's not, I mean, for me, I look at your recommendation, and I support your recommendation wholly. You're saying you don't have to build sidewalks, but you need to have an easement. You're not given that waiver.
Yeah.
And I don't think that he asked for a waiver for the easement. I think what he's talking about is the location, right?
It's a waiver from both.
He asked for a waiver.
Well, let me ask you, what would preclude those sidewalks where he drew them in option 2 from ever being built there?
It could be. You know, would
I
it
mean,
be-
can you guarantee that if some sidewalks are placed in that neighborhood, that they would be placed? Because I gotta agree with Mr. Ritt, it looks ridiculous to turn the sidewalk in and go inside his property, by his house, and then turn again. It looks ridiculous. It would be, you don't have a sidewalk 30 foot off the street?
We're not looking
I
at,
think
we're not
we-
looking at next year. We could be looking 50 years
I
down
don't
the
get,
road.
but it's ridiculous. I'm telling you, his idea of where to put them makes way more sense. I'm just being brutally honest. I think it looks ridiculous.
There's nothing stopping him from putting those in the right of way today, right now, where he shows them.
Well, what would preclude them from being put in on the street? I mean,
That's what he
Right
can put
now.
them in right now.
That's what the regulations.
That's what the
require.
regulations say, is they go in today
When someone
with
doesn't
approval
want
of
to
this.
install, they have option B, provide
the easement.
well, then all you just need to do is just guarantee that sometime in the future it can be placed there, right?
That's what it's
They actually
easement
have to
for.
install.
That's what the easement's
In that
for.
option A, it has to be installed.
In the subdivision regulations, it requires 13 feet per sidewalk.
I understand that, but we're just asking for an easement. We're not, I mean, holding the
I mean,
easement.
does
not
his
to-
property not go all the way up to the street?
No,
No.
not even close.
Well, who
Not
owns that
even
property?
close.
The city.
The city does?
It's
It's a right of
it's
way.
public owned.
Well, there's plenty of space for the city to build a sidewalk there in the future. We're spending $1 million on the sidewalk on Fairwood Boulevard. City is. People, the residents aren't doing that. Now, I'm not saying so what you're saying is, we have to put an easement in somewhere on that property so people in the future don't want a waiver from an easement or placing a sidewalk in the future, right?
So a lot of properties that we have these easements on, and this one included by what's being proposed, has drainage in the right of way. When we go put a sidewalk right here, we're gonna have to culvert that. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we could just move that around, weave it in and out of trees? We also have our public works for tree areas are getting a little tight on street trees. So they're wanting more space. Yeah, this becomes and I'll pose it another way. How do we draw this this exception.
Let me ask you this question. If you have him grant the easement on his property, 30 feet off the road, is there ever a time the city could force him to build the sidewalk there?
No. If they grant the easement, Mr. Ridd is off the hook on ever providing.
He would
any
never have to do it.
construction. No.
But by doing
But we
so,
can use.
we are not allowing everybody else to get a waiver for an easement.
Now, what is.
But
the
I would
truth
make
is
sure
we
you get
can
that in
put-
writing from the city that you don't ever have to build a sidewalk there, because
And to be clear, he doesn't have to do it, but would give the city the right to put it in a sidewalk that they pay for.
I mean, this is
in
single
that 10
tax
feet.
property too, they can do it.
And it would be nice, maybe a good compromise would be that that easement up on our property would only be used in the event that it's impossible to put the sidewalks along the existing right-of-way.
Impossible is a tough word.
Yeah, that's-
Or impractical, but I mean,
you cannot possibly look at that sidewalk going 30 feet from the road and think that that makes sense.
I think we have that situation in quite a few areas, and there is like the drainage there. That has been one of the challenges of putting sidewalks in. It's not just the concrete of a cubic yard, it's the fixing the drainage within there to get the sidewalk in,
so,
yeah, we might pave the road wider, there might be a.
I understand that. Now, if you go
A
out
roundabout.
20 feet with the road,
This is,
I
we're talking
understand.
40 years down the road. If
I
this
understand
happens.
that. If that road gets to be 60 feet wide, then the sidewalk's only 10 feet off the road.
Yeah.
I understand that, but,
There could be,
but in the Bluff area,
yeah,
that's not gonna happen.
don't think that's gonna happen either.
we do look at, you know, with our traffic committee, you know, the unique speeding, and it's amazing how many folks are wanting speed tables and things like that.
I agree 100% with your premise. It gotta be a slightly better solution than that. I don't know what it is.
Ultimately, the issue is, to me, that it's a requirement in the regulation. It gives us the flexibility, because we do have areas where we've got sidewalks that weave in and out, depending on what's there. It gives
Show
the.
me one that's 30 feet off the road. I want to see one in the entire city. I want you to bring it to the next meeting. I'm sorry, Eric, you're going to go there. Bring me one that's 30 feet. Bring me one that's 25 feet.
Corner of Morphe and
But
Bishop.
what they're saying is not a single sidewalk, and I'm not, just to clarify what I heard both of you say, was it might curve onto private property and curve back off.
Yeah,
Not to get around a tree.
Trees or
I don't
ditches or
disagree with that
culverts.
either.
That's-
but
that's all I
this
heard with that.
approaches absurdity.
And if you look at the regulation, I think the planning department, like I said, is misinterpreting the regulation. When you read the regulation, it relates to roads that are not controlled by the city, by the county or the state.
Legal
And when you
counsel from-
read it in that light, then that provision makes a lot of sense.
I don't have a dog in the design aspect, but I do disagree with the legal interpretation. I agree that staff is appropriately interpreting the subdivision regulations as written.
And we wrote that recently, so we know what the intention was. It was to prevent these same discussions every month and give somebody a fast track and not have to go through waivers, because that could kill a subdivision. You know, that's what this is. And reading that in a vacuum, I can certainly see where Mr. Britt would interpret that, but.
No, I'm reading it collectively with parts A and B, yeah.
Ultimately.
Okay,
it-
thank you very much for your time. I believe that there may be some comments from the,
It's not open to the
We
public,
can't have a public.
can they make comments? Because
can they?
some individuals that came tonight will not be able to make it next week. It might be beneficial that the planning commission could watch the tape.
Well, legally, I don't know what the answer is, but
And they
a
can
quorum
certainly
was not going to
provide-
be here to listen to these comments, so the commissioners that aren't here will not hear them.
And we can certainly get us any written statements and we'll get it to you.
We have a written statement and we're happy
That's
to
fine.
submit it.
That'll be perfect. We can get that and we can submit
But I'd
that.
like to speak as well. We'd like to speak as well, and if the written statement is,
I don't, all of the commissioners that would be voting on this are not here, so you speaking is not going to achieve the purpose you want.
achieve the purpose for 4 of you, at least, in our opinion, and I am going to be evaluated for open heart surgery, and I'm going to be out. So I'm sorry, I can't be here next week.
I mean, given the state of this meeting, there are no hard and fast
That's rules?
rules.
Okay. Then you
And
may
so
speak.
the fact that they're here and you allowed some others to speak, I think it is appropriate in your discretion to, if you so choose, to let the others speak, particularly if they can't be here next week, with everyone's understanding that as it relates to the vote next week, there's going to be a public, or whenever this meeting is reconvened with a quorum, whether it be a specially set meeting or the next regularly scheduled meeting in September, that planning commission members that are present are going to vote based on what was stated at the comments at a validly.
It's just public comment. is all.
Exactly.
It's just
Public comments
comment,
present.
And there's a lot of precedent
Okay.
Correct.
to allow that.
So and then the written comments.
Right, that's fine.
Yeah, not an official public hearing, but if they just want to educate us, it's
Correct.
here.
That's fine.
Yes.
So my name's John Cantwell. It's my wife Monica, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk on behalf of Bob and Renee Ritt. We're their next door neighbors. Our home is at 356 North Bayview Street. And looking at the Bluff neighborhood, it's evident that there are no sidewalks anywhere. And as one thinks about quote, development within that area, splitting lots. Clearly, this is not like building a subdivision out somewhere else in the community. The Bluff neighborhood maintains its charm, its small town appeal for people to safely walk, run, ride bikes throughout the area without sidewalks. And I would actually say that if one looks around other areas within Fairhope that have sidewalks, those are highly trafficked areas. Namely, if we look at Magnolia Avenue, Fairhope Avenue, and other places. Small neighborhoods within Fairhope proper, including the Fruit and Nut District, do not have sidewalks. So.
And then also I wanted to refer to the fact that historic maps, surveys, and photographs do not show any sidewalks anywhere. In addition, aerial photographs do not show any sidewalks. The single tax colony in 1911, the plat, designated the Ritz property, Lot 1 and 2, with no sidewalks anywhere. So now, in 2023, you're saying he has to have an easement for sidewalks. We disagree respectfully. The 1911 plat is historic and should not be considered as a new development at all. When they purchased the property recently, they relied on that 1911 plat, as did we when we purchased our property in 2010. There were no sidewalk easements. Therefore, the Ritz should not be required to include them now.
So the physician's creed is above all else, do no harm. And I firmly hold that government should also practice a similar creed, understanding that there are prerogatives as well to be honest and fair and do what is just. So pedestrians, residents, and visitors routinely walk through this area very safely. If one were to have a sidewalk on their property and nowhere else in the Bluff neighborhood, that would look ridiculous, and it would serve no public purpose. And it's also, if we look around Fairhope proper, it's difficult to maneuver wheelchairs to maintain the integrity and safety of the sidewalks. I certainly believe in having sidewalks where they're needed, and I would say for certain in the Fairhope Bluff neighborhood, they are not.
So the history of Fairhope shows that there are all kinds of events that occur in the Bluff. if we have sidewalks and curbs, people might trip over those, and it would cause more harm to the riders or the walkers or the runners through this area. We ourselves walk our dog, and we see areas of sidewalks that are in disrepair in the city area when we choose to walk the dog on these sidewalks. And we have to be careful because we are older now. We're both 65 or almost 65. And we want to make sure that those sidewalks would be well maintained, and so far that has not been our experience. So if you are, as a planning commission, going to require this easement for the Ritz, it will impose an undue burden on them for their ingress and egress to their property, especially if it's only 10 feet from their property. Having purchased this land, the Ritz are entitled to use their property as it was intended in the 1911 plat, regardless of the ADA's requirements for sidewalks. The new sidewalks impede their ability to enjoy the use of their property. As my husband said, we do not want significant governmental hindrance into using our property for our benefit, because it does violate their personal rights and their privacy interests.
And finally, I would just say, if in terms of option one, that's within the right-of-way, 20 to 30 feet from their property line versus within their property line, it only makes sense. And as Commissioner Burrell has said, it really looks ridiculous if it comes into it. It would impede the beauty of the neighborhood. Thank you.
I have one final comment. Sidewalks should be required based on a common sense approach. So that is, if there are neighborhoods developed with sidewalks that have uniform standards, they should be imposed upon the developers. But here we have no sidewalks anywhere on the bluff. We bought the property, they bought the property knowing that there were no sidewalks there and that it's historic. It's over a century ago this decision was made not to include sidewalks. So we argue that you should just leave the Ritz alone, leave future homeowners who wish to subdivide their property, leave them alone as well. Try not to fix things by making them worse for everyone. And we thank you for your time and consideration. And we will hand these remarks over to.
Anybody else like to speak?
To the extent there's anything necessary from a legal perspective, I guess the point would be the applicant has come before the Planning Commission seeking to change the plat and seeking a subdivision, which is the basis for opening up some of these issues based on what he's previously requested and what he's requested tonight. So it's just to set the record clear, even though we're not even on the record technically. You know, it's not as if the city is just forcing him to put in the sidewalk. It's part of the subdivision regulations, part of the subdivision process for him to achieve the other goals and what he's been able to achieve through the city for some other things that were part of his property.
Mr. Chairman, may I? I understand what the neighbors and what Mr. Ritter's saying, okay? But in thinking about this and going through, and especially with what I do, there's a few things. I mean, number one, Mr. Ritt took advantage of the regulations, rightfully so, to be able to subdivide his property and gain financial advantage from being able to now have two properties that he can sell one. And that was within the regulations. And the city evenly enforced those regulations and you were allowed to do it, okay? This is the same kind of regulation that has to be enforced evenly. When I work on issuing building permits or put requirements on somebody for building, if I wind up in court, do not have to think back and wonder what it is I allowed them to do or what it is I told them to do. My operation is to tell them what is in the regulation and enforce that regulation evenly and fairly. Because in this instance, we've had how many requests for waivers that have been denied through the time. The area where this easement will go is an unbuildable area. You cannot build anything there because of where it is on the property. You're not being asked to put in the sidewalks. If the easement is there, it is green space, it is your yard until the day comes, which may never come, that there are actually sidewalks. It does not affect your property at all unless a sidewalk is put in. And if that happens, then it happens. And that's something that's going to be done throughout the entire neighborhood. It's not going to affect just you. So it would be anything that would happen within that neighborhood. So, you know, and I understand your comment about the 1911 plat and how it was done. Well, the 1911 plat showed that as a single lot. It didn't show it as two lots.
Let me clarify there.
Sure.
The 1911 plat did have two
It
lots.
did show two. It was a
did lay out like
historic
this.
lot. It was a historic lot line.
There were historic
Okay.
lots that were replatted into one house sitting on it.
Correct.
So they, not Mr. Ritt, but a previous landowner voluntarily erased those lot lines, made it one lot.
And that's why we had to
So then a
subdivide.
subdivision
Right.
comes in, and you know, very few plats require a sidewalk.
Right.
It's just how the lots are created. Even plats today, a lot of times don't have sidewalks. But I do think, you know, it's something, we do have a public park there that.
Yeah. I mean, the fact is,
Doesn't
if
have
it,
sidewalk
yeah,
access.
if it created a physical hardship for you or a financial hardship that you had to pay to do this right now, that might be a completely other issue. But it doesn't. I mean, the fact is, the inclusion of this easement does not change the appearance of your lot at all until the day comes that there is a request by the neighbors to put in a sidewalk. That may be next year. It may be 100 years and we're all gone. We don't know. But it gives the flexibility to be able to do it. And from an enforcement standpoint, being able to evenly enforce the regulations we have, which may or may not make sense to some people, may or may not make sense at this time. We don't know what we're going to be dealing. There are things that come up now that are things we never thought we would have to deal with in different matters throughout town. Having the flexibility to be able to do it is something that the city, that's part of why we're here, is to make sure we have provided the flexibility for the city to be able to take care of whatever the desires or needs of the citizens at that time are. So, you know, it doesn't change anything about your ability to use your lot. It doesn't change anything about the appearance of your lot unless there is a sidewalk built at some point. Well, and as you stated, it's not very likely possibly, but then again, we have the ability if it comes up.
I was just going to add, remember the very first thing I said was I 100% agree with staff recommendation to require the easement. I didn't understand that from the street back was city property, but I would say this to you. I can't imagine the city would come in and say, we're going to install sidewalks now, and you have to build your portion on that easement. That's what I'm saying is ridiculous. I'm saying it because nobody else required to build a sidewalk, it would be 99% probability it would be a city project. And I wouldn't think that they would go up in your yard and build it. They would say, we're just going to build it on our property. We probably got, safe to say, at least 75 years before that would ever be taken up by road, if maybe 1,000 years. But if I'm on the council, I'm going to say that it needs to go on our property, not on yours, and force you. And I say that to say I do support the fact that you're required to have an easement so that we're treating everybody equally, to everybody's point. But I would never support you having to build that sidewalk yourself.
Also, that's single tax land too. It's not, Mr. Ritt doesn't own it. He's leasing it.
Yeah.
So.
And the other
sidewalk
thing
easements
is
that are
that-
put in are for just future somebody else's. The homeowner or the property owner that's granting that easement is never responsible for putting in sidewalks at a future date. This is letting them
No,
not.
it was said earlier that if there's sidewalks put in there, he would be required to put it in there. That's what I
Not
heard.
with the waiver.
No.
Or not with the
waiver.
easement.
It's either install sidewalks today or provide the easement in case we need it. But typically, we're saying we don't need it, but it's there to mitigate if we have a culvert right here. I don't think there's ever a scenario where the stretch of sidewalk is gonna be inside this property. But could it weave in and go around an oak tree or that may be there in 50 years that's not there today? I think we have those situations quite frequently.
Well, and the other thing,
Or
Hunter.
would like the option to have those.
Right. The other thing, Hunter, is there's two parts to this request. The other is he was required in the original approval to have the full 15-foot easements as required in subdivision regulations. The request is to pull those back to 5. I was probably the one that advocated the hardest for leaving the easements in because we use them all the time for drainage. Well, he took the initiative and hired Mr. Leave to come up with a drainage plan, hired an engineer to do it, and asked to reduce those easements to 5 feet. I am fully in support of that because that does affect his buildable area. When you got a 15-foot easement and a 10-foot side setback, that affects what he can actually do with his property. And I agree with that portion.
And we wish, more folks would do that. I believe the same month we had the subdivision, they're now building a house on it, and they have easements for drainage and losing their setback.
Right.
But some people choose not to have engineering, and that's where the standards of the regulations come into play. So, yeah, I fully support that. It's in our regulations to allow that. It is not in our regulations anywhere that recommends don't install sidewalks and omit the waiver. That was not contemplated when this change was made. Maybe we need to, if you feel like we need to change it, maybe we need to change it so it impacts everyone. But I need some guidance on which threshold do we measure to give up the waiver if that's the thing. Or the easement, I'm sorry.
Anybody else like to speak? We're good.
Okay.
Moving on.
Okay. Musical chairs.
Yep.
So if we are not having a public hearing, are we still within our work session discussing the proposed amendments, even though we're going to have to discuss them again with the full amount of people?
I think this is a perfect time because we can
Okay.
get some actual feedback without, too much pressure of a deadline.
Okay.
No, or late meeting, so, yeah. And the good thing there is if there's some minor changes, we can actually amend those. So, as far as text goes, there's not a whole lot here. And what I do want to kind of lead with, a lot of this that is proposed this time is kind of what's been done at the staff level for years. Just trying to get some instructions for people, because one of the things that's really tough to see is applicants that go to a home designer or to an architect or something, and then they come in and it's wrong because it's not clear. So I want to give you a prelude there. So what I've done is taken, okay, page 22, here's the red text. I'm going to kind of go through each sentence and show you some visuals. So the first step there in 2A is adding some clarification on covered walkways. Currently in our regulations, we don't allow covered walkways any way, shape, or form. It's just not even discussed. We allow a principal structure and we allow an accessory structure. They've got to be 10 feet apart, they're limited in size and lot
And yet,
coverage.
all over Fairhope, there are covered.
But all over Fairhope, there are covered walkways. And there's memos in staff from different, planning directors, and sometimes those interpretations can get a little different, and you see different flavors. I'm gonna flip real quick just to show you a plan we saw on a newly created lot on, I won't say where, because I don't want to put the focus on anybody. This is someone that came in with a plan recently, and that would be the street view of the house. It is technically a covered walkway, but they filled it in with a brick wall. It sits kind of between the garage and the house, but it's a big monolithic structure. with a shared roof.
Outside of the house setback? I mean, just to clarify.
Yes, yeah, this is in the space, outside the house setback,
Primary setback.
and within the 10-foot spacing, what we're doing here is wanting to give someone an opportunity to walk from the house to the garage in the weather. So, we've kind of looked at what others allow, and what we're basically saying here is you can have that, explicitly stating people can have that covered walkway. It can reside in the rear setback. But it's not to be enclosed. It's not to be used. I mean, it's not there for a back porch. It's there to walk from point A to point B. So it contains 2 walls. It's not heated and cooled. And it's perpendicular to the structure. We require 10 feet of separation from the building. There's been a few very creatively that said, okay, but we're going to turn that covered walkway, parallel to the buildings. Now you actually have no separation. They're 40-foot wide and 10-foot across. It's monolithic roof all the way from the front of the. So we're trying to clarify what the intent of the covered walkway is. And we're actually saying it may actually be within the rear yard. And that's kind of what we're doing there. The green shows an example of that. Any questions on this one or comments that for us or?
I just have a clarifying comment, I guess, where all the time when clients say, well, what do you mean I can't do that? I see it all over the fruit, they're building lot line to lot line, or that's what you hear. They're building lot line to lot line. What they're usually looking at is a primary structure, some kind of enclosed connector, and the garage all the same height. And it looks like they're building lot line to lot line because of the way it's been
and there's not as many as you think,
years.
but I think there has been a few, that
well, the people
push
who want
the
to do it
boundaries,
notice them.
certainly. And it's one of those things, if you don't have it in the regulations, it's going to keep blossoming out until then you can't say, well, you can't do it. Because so what we're trying to do, and I think we're certainly not saying this is the only solution. If there's any other tweaks, but we are trying to set some kind of guidance, pretty simple, but some guidance on what to do so that people know on the front end and they're not spending 2 months and having to redesign houses when we see something like we received with this one.
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to ask for clarification on the contains no more than 2 walls.
Mm-hmm.
I could see somebody saying, well, I only built 2 new walls. I used the 2 existing walls of the 2 buildings.
That's got to be open.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's open on 2 sides and not heat and cooled,
That might be
An actual
clearer.
breezeway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do have one question in the
Sure.
wording on this, because it doesn't show in your picture. It says the principal, the breezeway and the structure have to fall within the principal setbacks, or just the structure?
No, just the structure.
Just the structure, okay.
Just the accessory structure.
Got it.
And it kind of gets a little, this is a perfect square R2 size lot. I mean, sometimes you have an accessory structure, really deep lot, and the accessory structure's 80 feet from the principal building. And a lot of that breezeway can fall within the principal setbacks. In the principal setbacks, they should be, as long as they're meeting lot coverage, they should be able to do whatever they want to. And separation of any accessory building. So we're not saying that, but where this is kind of getting to is you are seeing every square inch maximized these days. Every square inch and then some. And I think that's where we're seeing these type plans from.
Is the covered walkway, is that going to be part of the
Rear lot coverage?
No, is that going to be added, is that going to be part of the, what's the word I'm looking for?
Impervious?
Total
Total lot
coverage, total lot coverage?
I would say that is. It is today. Nothing's changing.
I mean, it should be, right? I mean,
Yes.
what we're talking about is in.
We're there for impervious
too much
surfaces
runoff
and, yeah. Yes, it is there. We didn't clarify on here, but kind of have it in the back of our head. There is a required, we didn't intend, but wanted to talk to you about. So your accessory structure is limited to 25% of the required rear yard. we didn't want to take up, because it's not intended for usable space, we didn't want to apply that to the 25% rule. So if somebody can build a 600 square foot garage, they get to use every bit of that in their building. The walkway's just there as kind of it's covering from rain, just walking back and forth. It's not there as
Well, I
Right.
guess it depends on how you're using it. We don't have a good regulation on impervious air. We don't have that. We need that, to deal with stormwater.
Yeah.
How much of your lot can be impervious? If we were dealing with that, we would need to count it.
Spending millions of dollars to fix drainage issues in the fruit and nut because of this.
Yeah.
We have
have
some
limited-
regulations in our city building code.
Yeah,
There
we
are
do.
some things about pervious surfaces and things like that we do have in there.
Yeah. It could be a little better, and Eric and I have some good ideas there that we just got to figure out we almost had something, and then I think the jurisdictional change, kind of pulled away on some of the stormwater, what are we doing? So, I mean, one idea we've talked about, and I've seen a lot of areas, your total lot coverage tells you which buildings can cover the lot. And let's say R2, it's 37%. What a lot of areas will do is say, okay, pick a number, 5-10% over that so let's say you're 5% over. So 42% is your maximum impervious coverage of the lot. So that gives you 5% for sidewalks and, things like that. But other than that, it has to be a pervious surface.
So it
You still
does
do
count
gravel.
for total lot coverage. It doesn't count for
Impervious.
accessory
We're
25%.
building cover, what our zoning ordinance currently has. Now, Eric has some other impervious, but it's pretty broad and depends on a little bit where it's at, commercial versus residential. But the zoning ordinance, that percent coverage is just for building coverage.
Okay.
So within the stormwater, you could say, 10%, 5% over the total lot coverage is what your limit is on impervious. And that kind of, people can't pave the whole yard, because I think that is a major problem.
And I want to point out we're recommending an 8-foot width, where traditionally that's been a 10-foot wide breezeway that's going. But for a lot of people that's a covered porch. So we're proposing an 8-foot to be just a walkway, which will decrease the amount of runoff that we're getting from that by having it 2 foot narrower. And in simple terms, we're allowing this breezeway to be an extension of the principal building beyond the rear setback line, 8 feet wide to touch the accessory structure.
And typically with eaves, you might have another 2.5 feet.
18 inches.
So when you look at it from an aerial, your eaves are gonna stick out from that 8-foot breezeway.
Right.
And you got 18 to 2-foot eaves traditionally. So that will impact lot coverage.
So I might need to clarify, when you say 8 feet, you don't mean the roof line, you mean something other than the roof line.
Yeah, we don't do anything based on roof lines.
You're talking about the columns.
Other than the yard, we're defining yards, we're defining buildings as they touch those yards. So, there's some, with the architectural details and some of those things, they may extend into a yard, but we don't,
So it'd be from support post to post or header
beam.
beam to header beam.
But
Yep.
if they had LVLs running down, it would be those supports. You may not have columns every 4 feet going in.
And
so
the
we're gonna look
paving,
at
I would assume.
Ma'am?
I would assume that, maybe not.
I didn't hear.
Oh, the paving, maybe not, because the paving might
Pa-
continue?
Paving
Yeah.
could continue.
Okay.
Correct, so we're gonna be looking at where is it supported going through. If you took the roof
Okay.
off, what's a support member going to be? That is that 8-foot measurement that we're looking at.
Not to pick it, so if you had LVLs and you had 3-foot overhangs on either side and it was paved from the edge of the overhang to the edge of the overhang,
They
then
could-
you've got a 14-foot wide.
Now she's thinking, like, how do we get, yeah.
Well, I'm trying to
That's-
outthink myself. I know how architects think.
You absolutely are right, and one of the things that you and I've spoken about, some amendments, and this gets a little trickier, but it will get in right now. I mean, what is a pergola? Where is it allowed?
Open to the sky, yeah.
Is it open to the sky, most of the ones we're seeing, what's gonna limit that is the lot coverage. When
Okay.
somebody fills up the principal area completely, and also taking full advantage of the rear accessory, especially when they're on non-conforming lot, it's gonna limit, a little bit. And if we can really help with some of the other amendments and clarify what those are, I think it'll go a long way. We're just kind of,
And eaves and overhangs are only allowed 24 inches to extend beyond. So trying to do a 4-foot cantilever on each side and come out with.
You can't count all 4 feet.
oh, we've
Okay.
seen it. We've seen
we've
7-foot
it come in-
cantilevers out trying
come
to
in
get a
and have-
I
nursery.
love
That
deep
would be
overhangs, but yeah.
Essentially, with it being 8 feet wide,
Yeah.
it would be
Okay.
a 12-foot roof span would be the minimum.
And I
or the
think it's worth,
maximum that it could be.
Okay.
it's worth keeping that in and kind of seeing if we can clarify, either in this language or something else, what that is.
People are
So,
going to ask.
Could be eave. The breezeway measurement is eave to eave.
yeah. And again, at the end of the day, what our physical environment is, it's not our main, we're here to talk about that and whatever, but we're really trying to get some, with the volume of things we're seeing, it can really hold everybody up if there's not clear instructions of where is your max, because everybody's trying to push for that max right now.
Yeah.
And it can be 10 revisions sometimes. Well, can I do this? No. Whereas if we have clear instructions, I think it does help everybody to achieve our goals. So the next one, swimming pools are kind of one of those same things. Nothing within our regulations speak to swimming pools directly. So they've historically been lumped in with accessory structures. The location of them, the size, they're kind of in the same situation. I want to point your attention to, because really the only thing this changes, and it really hasn't changed much because we've allowed these through the years, but when you apply accessory structure, they have to be behind the rear building line of the principal structure. That's what our requirements call. So that means in the image on the bottom of the screen, they would have to be to the left of the light blue box. A swimming pool is a little different, and you see some buildings kind of wrap around either in U shape or L, kind of like this is. What we're saying with swimming pools is they can be behind the building, rear, just behind the building, not the rear building line. Yeah. So they can, they're behind the building visually screened. The rear building line actually defines the line that is furthest away from the front. So it means it's way back there. And that's the way accessory buildings currently read. And we're also saying no closer than 10 feet to the property line. So that is a little bit of a change.
Question, does that include the pool deck, or is that the aquatic
That
vessel?
is the edge of water, but that gives room for your pool deck, and that's why we're doing it, because 5 feet?
Yeah.
So 5 feet, that still gives room for some of the buffering and noise and everything that's wanted. So when they put the water line right at 5 feet, they're pretty much sitting on top of the neighbor, and in those narrow lots, that can be a challenge. So, and then something that doesn't come up much, but it's just a point of clarification on these accessory structures. Tennis courts, basketball courts, batting cages, and the like, kind of follow the same setbacks. As long as they're behind the rear building line, we're okay there. It's just adding that in. And then, so Rebecca, this gets tough on residential, because I don't want to overburden residential folks. But this is about lighting. It's not a regular occurrence, and I'm even really hesitant about this. Mike and I were debating today, because this could theoretically turn into a nightmare for our department if we're out policing lighting and neighbors. But the intent there, if you are putting in a basketball court or something along those lines, just keep your light out of the neighbor's window is the goal. I wish we could just say that. Don't be a jerk,
So is the intent, when you say direct light, you mean the source of light should not be visible and it shouldn't shine onto their property?
That's
what I was trying to.
Yeah, and I think the image there,
direct light is
I
just.
think Pennsylvania, Mr. Ritt was from, they actually have a light trespass state ordinance, and that's where these cartoons came from. And Rebecca and I spoke Friday, and she was a little concerned with that, like direct light, was that light coming from windows, was that, you know,
Well-
those sort of things.
Because it just says lighting, like if you're on the beach, you're looking at the
Yeah.
lighting inside the building, not shining through a window. And I think we want to be
Right.
clear, we're not talking about that.
Yeah.
It's exterior lighting
lighting.
is what you're talking about.
Yes, so I did propose the alternate, it's a little bit more wordy, but it basically gives a little bit more clear instructions
okay.
that, you know, there's some instructions there on, you know, your light has to be tilted down, kind of like the cartoon, and the image on the right, and not be taller than 10 feet. I don't want to go with a photometric, and I'd rather just take this section out than to go that route. This is not a major problem. I mean, it's really not, just while we're in there on the section, trying to give some guidance when people are thinking about these things. So,
Well, the city manages, we've had several streetlights that shine straight into our windows, and some nice man came out with a spray can and spray painted the fixture where it faced the city fixture where it faced our house.
glad we're not in a
There's-
public hearing.
No, a city employee.
Oh, yeah,
Not
well,
us.
that's the
That was the
shielding
city's
of-
solution.
Yeah, and there,
Yeah.
I mean, that is, in certain types of lights, you
There's-
can do that.
There's some very low-tech ways to solve that
Right.
problem,
Yeah.
is my point.
Yes.
We didn't do it.
And you've probably got a neighbor that's paying for that light too, that we've go out, so I think they're $9 a month to install those lights. So, you know, if you have any thoughts on that and want to give us a call or email or got any suggestions right now, I'm happy to hear them.
I just remember our convex, we had somebody who had that issue years ago, and they planted a convex mirror in front of the neighbor's light.
Oh,
yeah.
that's parabolic to direct it back. That's hilarious. And I kind of
It
appreciate
happens.
that. Now, this one is not in your packet, but after some conversation that kind of gets into some bigger, maybe some bigger things, but there is an option here. So let me go back to the first image. Right now, so the front of a lot, and this is why I drew this diagram. A front of a lot here abuts a neighboring property's front yard. And right now, an accessory structure can be 5 feet from the neighbor's property line and 20 feet from the street side. This is kind of right in front of their yard, and we've got some situations where this is not an ideal situation. And option B that we put here is this language, just adds a simple sentence. But what it's basically saying is, if you're doing accessory structure and you're on a corner lot, we're one of the few areas that don't match. Corner lots don't have to have the same front setback on both sides of the corner. That's, most places have that, and it resolves this. But basically, where this option would say those accessory structures step back to a line with the front setback of the neighboring property. So at least the principal house can still be there at the 20-foot, but it gives, since they're 5 feet away, it gives a little bit of a, and remember, that rear yard's only 25%, so we're not reducing the amount or size of the building they can build. So by doing that, you know, and it's a good thing here, it moves with the adjacent property by referencing the front setback line. It works for every zoning type. It works if somebody's had a variance. You know, it allows things to kind of move in and out. I think the 20-foot was actually a mistake, but the cat's out of the bag in Freak Nut. I think we had one last month that we discussed, because moving out, once you go out, it was on Morphe in the subdivision. Corner lot, all the houses in that stretch of Morphe are, you know,
Way
60,
back.
you know, to 80 feet back the road, and all of a sudden you're going to get something pushed with a garage pushed 20 feet. Really changes the dynamic of that area. So it may be something we want to consider. I would hesitate to do that in the fruit and nut, so if we were to do something, we'd have to look at something that could make a distinction in the fruit and nut, where there's a grouping of non-conforming lots, that we've already had this situation at almost every corner, or the majority of them. But at this point, we're not proposing to change anything that affects the principal structure, just the accessory structure. Any thoughts on moving that one forward, or, because we presented it as an option, but it would apply to swimming pools,
I just,
batting
you know,
cages?
under my lot, I'm in the fruit and nut.
Mhm.
And technically, the front of my house is really the side facing the street.
Mm-hmm.
For practical purposes, the front of my house faces another street. The only place I would have room on my lot now is in that, what I consider my front yard. I have no room at the back or either side to build a pool.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted to put one in.
When you can't do that today.
Can't?
Uh-uh.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a variance
I
that
don't
came
want
forward.
to.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that street side yard,
Definitely not already.
there's a few out there, but they were done many, many years ago. I believe there was we had a variance for that same thing in the last 6 months, and it was denied.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, and it was very close to the,
Yeah.
where we were just looking at the previous house.
I've always, the side setback thing has always seemed strange to me when you see, people going down a road and then bump. So it feels kind of, and I'm thinking more, not pools as much as garages, just it feels like a good compromise that doesn't impinge on the primary structure. Even though, with a new subdivision, we might want to consider doing the side setbacks the same as the front. If you were starting from scratch and not kind of jumping into the fabric where everything is all over the place. But
And that kind of was that way until the 80s. I mean, it was the history of Fairhope was the corner setbacks. It's kind of funny when you hear people talk about how on their 66-foot wide lots, how hindered they are. They used to have front setbacks of 40 feet, and corner lots were 40 feet on both sides, which a lot of those are down to 35, and
Yeah.
you get 20 on, so.
Well, if you look at the
You
historic
look at the
plats,
cottages
the
that were there.
cottages were a lot smaller.
Right. Okay, we've got that one. This one is just a cleanup. There's nothing that changes here. We're gonna be working with the tree committee and trying to update the tree ordinance and zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations to coordinate better landscape requirements, because they can conflict at times. So this is just an effort to move in that direction while we were in here. And then fences and walls. Again, this is the red lines that we're proposing for amendment on 35, but I'll go through each one really quick. I think all of you got the copy. Eric and I have talked about this, and even Chris wrote it down. So before the meeting, I added the text in red, because I do agree when you read that. What we're meaning is when you have a right to build a fence on your property line or a wall. Ironically, we had somebody come in today. We deal with quite a few people that are building on the wall, and they're not thinking about how to construct it. And a lot of times they're going on neighbor's property to do that. And we had someone today that came in like, the fence company's in my yard and, doing this. What we intend here is you don't damage the neighboring property. But we wrote the word, is disturbed, and I think we didn't intend, George, I'm disturbed by that fence. So, yeah.
That's a whole lot.
So it's physically disturbed, not
Yes.
piss them off.
So we clarified during construction of walls and fences at or near property lines, construction activities shall not physically disturb adjacent properties without the express written consent of the affected adjacent property owner.
Thank you.
And I'm a little hesitant to, yes, so that was the point. This is more of instructions with people that don't think about it on the front end, because you can design a retaining wall to stay off somebody's property. other property, but sometimes they don't think about it, and then it's a delay. So we're trying to get ahead of some of those things. And then this one is a little tricky to write, actually, but we allow fences or walls, and this image shows where that fence can be 4 feet and where it can be 8 feet. One challenge here is also on the corner lots. Remember, what we're doing with yards is creating a street, not houses. That's what setbacks are for. We're creating the street, and don't want to impede on people's private property rights to build their home or anything, but we are trying to collectively get a street as well. And we've had some that build 8-foot walls on that street side corner lot that are not an ideal situation. So that's one way to think of it. But then you also have kind of this weirdness in this area here on the screen. The neighbor to the south can only build a 4-foot wall fence, but the neighbor to the north in the same physical location can build an 8-foot. So.
Wow, the neighbor to the south might want to build something to hide the back of the 8-foot fence.
Yeah. But again, the streets get, the street, you're driving down the street and you see that. And in some streets where you have 90-foot right-of-ways, it's one thing. If you've got a 40-foot right-of-way, it can be a big, it can be a challenge. So what we're proposing, we'd actually have to write a definition, but end result is, where the house is, kind of that same principle of aligning with a neighbor. Keep the fence down to 4 feet if you're out on that street side until you get back to the house. That should alleviate most people, they would still be able to have an area of privacy within their property. But, kind of leaving that on the front. We do not have a definition, and sometimes the keyword street side building line. Before we went and write that definition, just seeing if everybody's agreeing with this or if we're off line, out of line, and you want us to kind of look at something else. But to get this end result, we would have to add a definition. We have a definition of front building line. We would have to add a definition of street side building line.
When I first saw this, I thought of a neighbor who had this situation and where we used to live, who would have, who really wanted their private, they had that corner lot and they wanted their privacy in their backyard. And what struck me is a fence is not the only way to do that, that they could still plant a hedge. You could still, and we were talking about reading articles about people who were installing like fully grown hedges, but you could, things go quickly here. You could still have a living fence if you planted a hedge and have that privacy if you did want it without being as obtrusive towards the street.
Right. And I don't think we're getting to the point, but there are some situations. This kind of, can be concerning. I don't think we're getting to Miami yet where all the front yards are high fenced and, but
Paparazzi isn't as much
this
of a
has come up enough where we're actually, suggesting we make this amendment. No negatives? Okay. And that's all we've got. On the amendments, I'll certainly, if anything comes up, I'll send these slides to you because they weren't in the packet. So I'll send they just put these together today. I'll send these to you tomorrow. Would you mind sending those out? So if you want to take a look at those and have any tweaks or anything, we'll be happy to take that or just wait till the next month.
Thank you.
So right now we're gonna tentatively, do y'all have a time the four of you on next Tuesday? Same time or maybe an hour earlier?
Ooh, that'd be great.
Same time.
Same time? Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. We're here to serve.
You have to work.
No.
I have a conflict on Tuesday, but if you guys could get to quorum without me.
That's what I think tomorrow morning is our goal. So just somebody with staff will be getting in touch with y'all, and and seeing what we can get, where we can get a quorum.
I'll be here. Don't need to.
Okay. Well, we might have to look at another date if we,
God willing.
we got 3 folks for Tuesday,
Let's
but,
hope it does, though.
right.
Just to clarify, we're not having a small executive session, we're waiting. Okay.
Okay. So okay, then you really, if you're recusing yourself, you might not need to be here anyway. We're
Oh,
just
wait, no, I
doing
meant
Aldi.
tonight. Are we having a executive session?
We're not, because we do not have a quorum to open up the meeting to move into executive session.
Okay, so that's really more that I probably need to be there next week because we might do it then.
You can discuss.
Okay.
And we will post again, just to make sure anybody joined us. We will post in all the standard physical locations on the website, and also email the news groups that we have on our notification list. All right,
Let me ask a quick question, too, on a technicality. You passed the gavel earlier. Were you recusing yourself from that discussion?
I was going to recuse myself when we were voting on it.
So if we had had another person here and you recused yourself, you would not have had a majority of members
We would have been able to
voting.
vote on that one.
Oh,
To approve something, it would have had to be unanimous. So we have to have 5 to start a meeting, but on any one particular case, 4 can vote, but it has to be unanimous in
Right.
favor of everything.
And I may
on
have
it.
That's correct.
misspoken, abstain
And her
versus.
abstention would not affect the quorum, so she still
Oh,
would have
wouldn't
been.
have? Okay.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes we've had that in a council meeting where you
Yeah.
had 3 people there, the majority, but then somebody couldn't vote. And in an ordinance, you have to have
Right.
a true majority of the council, which would have been 3 votes. So anyway, I was making sure we weren't running into one of those situations.
We would have had to have all 4 join in the vote.
Yes. And one dissension would have killed them. So in that situation, sometimes even for an applicant, they might think about that.
If one does vote against it and you don't get a unanimous vote, is it just table, is it whatever you're voting on
Well,
table?
actually-
No,
If you
if it was a quorum, it would have been a denial.
Yeah. So sometimes that's where, if you ever find yourself in that situation, please help us to remember to explain that process very clearly to the applicant.
And I would have done that tonight.
We were
Unless
prepared.
you want to defeat something and you want to force it.
Informalize the switching of the chairs, but we were so informal for our longest non-meeting meeting that I've attended, so.
Yeah.
On that note, can we close the meeting?
Yeah.
All right.
Nobody's-
Yeah, we can just